Hello and good afternoon, friends. Welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, with our ongoing series on basics of sociology, today we are going to talk on research methodology as well as on methods. And for this discussion, we have once again with us in our studios Dr. Archana Prasad. Dr. Archana Prasad is Assistant Professor in Department of Sociology, Kamla Nehru College, University of Delhi. Dr. Prasad has immense experience and she believes in giving her maximum knowledge to the students. That's why, dear friends, through this live sessions, she shares maximum knowledge with you. If you want to ask questions from Dr. Archana Prasad on the particular topic, that is today's topic of discussion, then you can call right in the studio. You can contact us through our toll-free number. Our number is 1-800-110-430. Dear friends, I repeat, our number is 1-800-110-430. Friends, you are requested to call in the last 10 minutes of the lecture so that the lecture goes uninterrupted, as well as at the end your queries are also resolved. So let's welcome our guest, Dr. Archana Prasad, and let's try to understand today's topic in detail: research, methodology and research. Hello ma'am, welcome to the lecture.
Hello Deepika. Good afternoon, welcome back to the series of lecture on basic sociology. Today's lecture, I'm going to talk about research methodology and methods. Most of the time in general understanding, we tend to confuse methodology and methods when we try to understand or we assume that the two are more or less. Today, it is trying to understand in the sense that methodology is to talk about philosophy of science, and therefore the lecture is divided into two parts. In first part, I'll be trying to understand what is the nature of social science research and try to understand the distinction between methodology and methods. Third, we try to understand why do we need to have a choice of research method. There are n number of research methods available, and how does a researcher decide on the choice of the method he or she needs to adopt in his study. And therefore, the whole understanding of the choice of research is somewhere linked to the entire idea of the philosophy of social sciences, in the sense that how the entire discipline of sociology emerged. And there is a kind of shift from a positivist to an interpretative understanding, in the sense that we try to see, we'll be looking into sociology as a science, and then how sociology is not actually similar to physical sciences. And therefore, we try to understand the difference between positivist approach and the interpretative approach. Very important in social sciences is the whole understanding of objectivity, whether objectivity, as is prevalent in the physical sciences, is possible in social sciences. And therefore, this whole understanding of objectivity and subjectivity is linked to the interpretative and the positivist school. So the positivist school would give preference to kind of an objective reality. For them, society was out there and it could be observed or it could be studied through laws and through rules. Whereas for the interpretative approach, it was society was to be understood through everyday interaction, through symbolic meaning. And they try to understand the distinction between the two approaches. And coming from the interpretative approach, we also have a whole idea of reflexibility, how it is important to understand the reflexivity in social science research. Second part of the lecture, I'll be trying to look into types of data. In general, we have in any kind of a research, there are two kinds of data. One is a quantitative data and the qualitative data. And type of the data collection, the methods are qualitative and quantitative. In quantitative methods, basically it is more to do with survey, experiment, and this is again linked to the philosophy of positivist school. Then in qualitative methods, we have interview, ethnography, we have case studies, field-based researches, and each method has certain advantages and certain disadvantages. One needs to map out the advantages and disadvantages and also spell out the advantage and disadvantages in any study. Many a time there was a shift from quantitative research to qualitative research, and there's a lot of conflict between quantitative and qualitative, and therefore we have the method called mixed method, where both quantitative and qualitative methods are used in order to have a more holistic understanding of social reality. Therefore, then we'll go into the whole idea of what are the stages of research. There are certain processes through which research needs to be conducted. Though in social sciences, there are no fixed boundaries, and the researcher is free to do research in a more open and flexible manner. And therefore, it is also important to keep in mind certain ethics which are essential while conducting social science research. When we look into social science research can be defined as human activity in which social reality is studied with the objective to gain a valid understanding of it. That is to say that what is the task of a sociologist? A sociologist needs to understand beyond commonsensical understanding, go into the in-depth meaning of why certain behaviors, certain interactions are the way in which they are doing. And research help us to undergo delve into the details of social interaction going on in society. Any social research, there are 5 dimensions. The first is sociological, and that is in itself says that social nature. A sociological dimension of research implies how it would be different from political science, from economics, from any other discipline, and therefore it is important to emphasize on the social aspect of social reality of human interactions and behavior. Ontological is the reality, is the how human beings, the interaction is not happening in a vacuum, it is in a real life situation, and therefore it is important to explore how interactions and behaviors are taking place in the real empirical reality. Teleological is that the research is oriented to a goal and a purpose, that each research has an objective to be achieved, and with that objective in mind, there are certain processes that has to be followed to achieve the goal. Then epistemological. Epistemology means knowledge, search of knowledge. Research in a manner is actually a search for knowledge. So we try to accept that any kind of research which is being done is in the sense of a quantitative analysis is to actually prove or disprove a hypothesis, but in qualitative analysis it's a search of knowledge or new kind of a knowledge. It's an action towards theory building, and that therefore each research has an epistemology. Then we come to methodological dimension, that is how the above 4 ideals could be achieved. There are certain processes, there are certain procedures, and there are certain techniques through which research is carried out in order to achieve the objective of the research. These principles inform the choice of the research method. So we have to keep in mind the 5 dimensions in the selection of a topic for the area where the research has to be done, how the methods or the tools and techniques that has to be employed for the research to be carried out. And this helps us to get a clear picture of the reality that the researcher is investigating. Then we look into the objectives and functions of research. The major objective of research is to discover new facts and verify old facts. And therefore, it is very important to understand why would anyone try to understand. For instance, if we try to understand the institution of marriage, in the contemporary society, we cannot go by the earlier understanding of marriage, which was only biological. Today, we need to move beyond biology to understand the nature, institution of marriage, and therefore, it needs to be investigated and it needs to be researched in order to arrive at a new understanding of the institution of marriage. The second objective is to find a causal connection between human activities and natural law governing them. This comes in more from the positivist interpretation, which was believed that the entire social society were governed by certain rules, and if these rules could be identified, so social action could be interpreted accordingly. And therefore, the understanding that each behavior had a certain law, and the law could help you to interpret the causes of the behavior. The third objective is to understand the human behavior and its interaction with the environment. This comes in from the later discourses in sociology, which emphasized on interpretative understanding, that the human being is in a constant interaction with the environment. That is, the research is dependent on the context, in political, social, economic context, as well as the biography of the researcher, and that needs to be kept in mind. Social research performs certain functions. Number one is that the function is to discovery of new facts and their interpretation. So we try to, through social research, arrive at certain understanding of a phenomena, and therefore we try to give a new interpretation to it. And this helps us to understand reality as it is changing through space and time. Then we try to understand diagnosis of problem and the analysis. For instance, if we are trying to research on why there is an increase in communal violence in the country, we need to research on the role of religion to understand the interrelation between religion and politics in order to diagnose the problem of increasing communal violence in a country like India. So the third function is control over social phenomena. The fourth is prediction. Social research aims at finding an order among social facts and their causal relation. And that is to say that we try to understand society as a whole, and each are interrelated. That is a part and whole relation. And try to understand any phenomena is not to understand only the phenomena in itself, but to relate it to the other institutions, other process, other behavior or other actions taking part, and that would help us to have a more holistic understanding of the reality. Then we come to the distinction between methodology and method. Methodology refers to the broad theoretical and philosophical frame into which procedural rules fit. It's a broad frame of research process. So methodology is basically the framework of research. It gives you the theoretical knowledge base of the research, whereas methods is the technical rules, or basically it is the tool that would be used in order to collect or analyze data. So the method could be in terms of different kinds of methods. For we have method of data collection, which could be survey, observation, interview, case analysis, content analysis. Then we have method of data analysis. So data analysis could be in terms of statistical analysis, which is more in the realm of quantitative data methods, or we could have data analysis in terms of qualitative data analysis. And these days we have a lot of computer-based software that helps us to do different kind of statistical as well as qualitative data analysis. Some of the computer software which are available in the Strata, then we have Ethno, we have SPSS. So these computer software help a researcher analyze data, represent data in the form of graphs, in the forms of diagrams, and that aids the researcher to interpret data in a more easy manner. The third could be method of research inquiry. The research inquiry is the methods are in terms of formulation of a hypothesis, the construction of concepts, theories, and proposition. Again, there is a distinction between the quantitative and the qualitative data, where it is in the qualitative data, there is hypothesis need not necessarily be proved or disproved. Maybe the hypothesis changes in the process of research, whereas in quantitative method, it is a question of either proving the hypothesis or the tentative statement or disproving it. Then method lay down the procedure for generation of reliable and objective knowledge. And the interface between methodology and method is considered as the philosophy of social research. And methodology elucidates the theoretical orientation with which the research process is to be carried out. The basic elements that build research methodologies are concepts, proposition or hypothesis, and theory. Concepts are the most important and the integral part of social research, because it is with the concepts that the entire research process would be outlined, or the research. It is very important to identify the necessary concepts for social research. It is a significant symbolic component of social scientific language. Proposition or hypothesis, they are tentative statement. That's a kind of a tentative question on a social problem. For instance, if we try to understand, say, why is there increase in lesbian relations or homosexual relations, we need to understand or raise a question that is or does the modernity has brought about change in the traditional understanding of marriage, or has the traditional institution of marriage fragmented and therefore resulted in other forms of relationship. So this needs to be understood in context of the changes that are coming in through modernity, and try to understand the institution of marriage. Theories are systems of concepts and propositions that explain the relationship underlying principles characterizing a phenomena. So every discipline has a kind of a theoretical background which would actually help us to explore the research in a particular direction. So then we come to the choice of research method. The choice of the research method depends on research question, philosophy of research, preference and skill. Whatever approach we choose for the research, we need to consider 5 questions. What is the unit of analysis? For instance, it could be a small group, that is, it could be a micro level understanding, which could be on the basis of certain individual, or it could be a macro level study, which could include a country or a nation. The second question is, are you relying on a universal theory or local knowledge? So we have certain kind of macro meta-narratives or theoreticals which are already existing, and those are able to explain the larger picture, but many a time we need to understand the micro details of it, and therefore we would have to depend on the local knowledge, and that will help us to build about new concepts, new theories in research. Will theory or data come first? So we try to, many a time there is a debate whether we should first go into the theoretical existing theories and then go into the data, or sometime it is the data which reveals new theories. So it is important to understand which is the priority. Should you read the literature first and then develop your theory, or will you gather your data and develop your theory from that? It is neither, it's not a question of better or bad, which is either way is equally relevant. Will you study cross-sectional or longitudinal study? Are you looking at one point in time or changes over time? So is it a study which is in the one context, or is it a spatio-temporal study? That is it looking at a particular phenomena over a spread of geographical unit, or is it a kind of evolutionary study in the sense that what was the past and what is the present, and there is a kind of a mapping of the past to the present. Then it's a whole question of whether the objective is to falsify a theory or is it to agree to a theory, and this could be either depending on what the data analysis or the data results say at the end. Now, what is very important to try to understand is the philosophy of social research, and philosophy implies scientists, how social scientists think, argue, construct the knowledge of society different from other branches of knowledge. So each discipline has its own philosophy, and that is depending on the objective of the discipline or the historical understanding of the way in which a particular discipline has emerged. And the philosophy tries to aim interpretation of social science that answers the following question: what is the nature of social? So that is how it would be a sociological study different from the other studies. How are the social science distinct from natural science? And this is whether the whole debate of whether sociology should be a science, the way it was thought of by the founders like Auguste Comte and Karl Marx, or is there something which is unique in the discipline of sociology, which is not in the scientific in the sense in which physical sciences are to be understood, and therefore it has its own dimensions in which the construction of knowledge is taking place. There is a search for scientific truth, but not in the same manner as it is happening in the physical and the natural sciences. And therefore, if it is different from the natural sciences, it has a distinct method which would make it more sociological. how do we then investigate social properties and social structure? Here it is very important to understand, when we try to understand the debate between sociology as science, is to try to understand that in the natural or the physical sciences, most of the researches are taking place through experiments in the lab. So it is a control conditions under which research is done on a small kind of a sample or a small focus, whereas for a sociologist it is the entire society which is the laboratory, and the research has to be done on a wider scale because all the entire population are the respondent for the research. And this is the major distinction between sociology and the natural sciences. And therefore, the whole idea that what makes it scientific is the whole search for knowledge or search for truth, which is an ongoing process. Sociology in the beginning saw itself as objective and neutral objective science, and therefore Comte had referred to it as physics, social physics, that is a study of society. Later, there was a shift with Max Weber and other interpretative understanding, and they were saying that society is not fixed, the reality is not given, and therefore it cannot necessarily be studied through the laws which as it is done in the natural science, because social reality is in a process of continuous construction and the meaning changes. So there cannot be any kind of a generalization on the basis of an understanding of a small unit or a small group, and therefore the whole understanding of relativity, that it is the meaning which is attached to social interaction which has to be understood by a researcher, this meaning could change from one context to the other or from one society to the other society. And therefore, I will look into both the debates in terms of sociology, how the initial founding fathers of sociology tried to give the understanding of sociology as a science, and then we see the development which took place in sociology to consider it as a distinct discipline where the focus is on social behavior and interaction. When we look into sociology as a science of society, sociology is not different from the natural sciences as far as method of inquiry is concerned, and therefore it is considered in terms of a unity of method, that both science and natural science and sociology are trying to do the same thing, that is they try to discover law that will help to interpret behavior of human being. The idea of positive philosophy was to discover positive laws of social development, and we'll see this through the works of Comte, Durkheim, Karl Marx, Talcott Parsons, where they were trying to understand social development by giving in certain laws, and these laws were able to help to understand the process of social change that was taking place in society. Human experience, therefore, could be understood through laws, but there was a certain kind of generalization. There were generalized laws which was assumed to explain social reality in totality. Social science can use methodology and insight of physical science as model of development, and therefore we had the emergence of sociology from the idea of sociology similar to physics. The earliest mention of scientific approach to this study of society was found in the work of Auguste Comte. Auguste Comte also tried to understand society through certain stages of evolution from religious society evolution to a society where there is rationality. The positive approach is the approach which is used in natural sciences, is applicable to the study of human behavior in society. In natural sciences, the experiment is conducted in the laboratory. In sociology, the society is the lab. Results are more or less the similar, based on objective method, where the emphasis was on objectivity. The social reality could be understood in an objective, rule-like manner. Believe that objective facts produce valid evidence from which generalization can be made. The methods used were questionnaires and interview, which provide data which could be statistically studied. So, you try to develop certain laws, capture certain data, convert it into statistical interpretation, and on the basis of those statistics try to arrive at certain generalization. This was the basic premise of the positive philosophy in the social sciences. And the understanding was that the result or the findings would therefore be value free. It would not be influenced by the personal choice or the personal bias of the researcher who is doing. So, the understanding was that the researcher would keep away his or her personal feeling, bias, prejudice while doing the social research. And this we see it in the positive philosophy is found in the works of Durkheim in his work Rules of Sociological Method. The subject matter according to Durkheim was the finding of social fact. He said anything could be a social fact, but when it has certain characteristics like it is constraining, it is upright to individual, and it is external, becomes social fact and becomes a subject of study by the sociologist. In his research on suicide, Durkheim states that social facts should be seen as thing, and that suicide was not an act of individual but product of collective forces external to the individual. So, he was trying to understand an individual behavior in the sense that why individual commits suicide, and he was trying to understand this by looking into the conditions or the social structure of the society which was forcing an individual to commit suicide. And therefore, he would say that and he was bringing in a space analysis. For him it was that a single man who was staying in an urban area would be more prone to commit suicide than a married man staying in a rural area. So, there was certain generalization on which he developed his understanding of certain types of suicide in society. So, similar to Durkheim, we also have the functionalist approach and the Marxist approach, which were following the positive philosophy in the understanding of society. So, the functionalists were trying to understand the functions which the structures were performing, and these functions were then kind of generalized. And Marxism was trying to understand that there was a change in the structure of society based on the economic nature of the society. So, he believed that when there was a change in the modes of production from a primitive mode to a capitalist mode, the structures of society underwent change and a class-based society emerged. So, we were all trying to understand in the light of the positive philosophy. Interpretative approach came in with the work of Max Weber. And Max Weber believed that social reality could not be understood as a thing out there to be measured and compared, but it is in the process of everyday interaction, the meaning attached that needs to be understood. And therefore, he said that value-free or neutral sociology or social research was not possible. And similar to Weber, we have the hermeneutics and we have the symbolic interaction, for whom the everyday life, the common day understanding of everyday life had to be interpreted and a new meaning had to be given to these understanding. So, even similar to Weber, we have Alvin Goldner, who criticized the ideas of society is concerned with producing objective truth, and therefore he tried to ask for a reflexive society, that it is the researcher who would reflect on the everyday meaning of interaction that is taking place in the society and accordingly try to interpret social reality. So, between the positivist approach and the interpretative approach, we see the research methods would be the philosophy of these two would impact on the methods. So, quantitative methods is more inclined to positive philosophy, and it is the qualitative method which is more inclined to the interpretative philosophy. In the second half of the lecture, I will try to understand the different kinds of research method used in in social research in terms of differentiating between qualitative and quantitative method. Thank you. Welcome back to the second half of the lecture on research methodology and method. So in the first half, I tried to talk about what is the philosophy of social sciences, what are the objective and functions of social research, and how the philosophy of the science determines the nature of methods that needs to be taken up. So in this half of the lecture, I'll be talking about the types of data. There are basically two types of data, or data in the sense the data collection. When we are doing data collections, there are basically two kinds of data. One is the primary data, which is the researcher himself or herself collects through the use of various research techniques or tools like interview, questionnaire, observation. And the second is the secondary data. Secondary data would refer to the use of existing literature or data that is in the sense of large scale studies which are being going. One researcher can use the existing source already, because many a time it is not possible to cover the entire universe of the study if it's a large scale study. For instance, the census data, the census which the Government of India conducts, has excellent quantitative data. So these data can be used for the researcher, and the researcher need not necessarily go and do the survey again. So keeping in mind the philosophy of the science, we see that it is the primary data becomes more handy for the qualitative research, for people who are going to follow interpretative philosophy of science, because you have to understand everyday life, and therefore you cannot necessarily rely on the data that was existing. Whereas people who would try to be more positivist, who would try to discover laws of understanding social reality, would rely on secondary data. But secondary data also suffers from a limitation in the sense that it could be not necessarily reflecting the reality of the researcher at the point that the research is being done, because the data was collected in a particular time and a particular context. So there are certain merits and demerits of both, and both has to be kept in mind while doing a research. Another very important way of trying to differentiate types of data in the sense of used in social researches is quantitative data, which is data through statistics, number, quanti means number. And these numbers are only a means to test hypothesis, where we try to look into the relation between cause and effect. So you do a large kind of a survey, collect a certain kind of data, and then those data are statistically interpreted to arrive at certain understanding. So there's a lot of tables and graphs and figures which would be used for comparing, reality. For instance, if we try to understand the nature of family life in America and in India, we draw a sample of 500 family. We try to give a questionnaire, collect certain kind of data on it, and from both the society, then interpret it through graphs and tables and figures, statistics, and then arrive in terms of the differences and the similarity between the two society. Then the second type of data is in terms of qualitative data. Qualitative means the content. So qualitative data is trying to talk about more into the quality of the social behavior or interaction or the process that we are trying to. So there is not much focus on numbers. That data are not collected in the sense of numbers. Most qualitative studies don't have a sample, so it could be the whole society which is studied. Generally, the quantitative data is applied to a large universe, whether it is the entire country which is to be studied, whereas qualitative is to a smaller micro society, so that it is able for the researcher to cover all the respondents available in that society. The qualitative data are used to interpret and understand social interaction. So there is no graphic representation, or there is no kind of giving graphs and diagrams, but rather it could be in terms of a discourse, where the reality is presented as it could be experienced by the respondent. And it is more descriptive. It is more in the sense of drawing a description of the reality rather than giving in the data and statistics. If we do a comparative study of the quanti and the qualitative methods, we see that what is the question that a quantitative research asks is that who, what, when, how, and why. So these are some of the questions which a researcher would ask while doing a quantitative research, whereas in a qualitative research, the question is how much. So it is not a question of why you are doing, but how much of it is being reflected. The second is objective. The objective of the quantitative research is to understand the magnitude or occurrence of association. So, and the qualitative, it is to understand the nature or quality of a phenomena. So if we are trying to understand, for instance, the significance of religion in modern society, the quantitative would go into the number of communal violence that would take, number of people who would have been affected by the violence, whereas the qualitative research would go into understanding how the communal violences has affected the lives of the people and to what extent it has affected them. Then we will go into the method. In quantitative research, most of the time they use of two methods which is very common, which is survey method and the experiment method. The survey is a large scale collection of data. I'll come back to the details of each of the methods, but here try to understand the distinction between qualitative and quantitative. In qualitative, the methods are more in-depth, that is, for instance, the ethnography, participant observation, content analysis, and these days we have also have use of visual research, that is the use of photographs, media, etc. Then in terms of analysis, quantitative analysis is deductive. That is, you from numbers, from the quantity, you deduce or you arrive at a conclusion. Whereas in qualitative, it is inductive. You are trying to induce, you are trying to generate new knowledge, trying to interpret society in a new dimension. Then, as I have already repeatedly told, the philosophy of quantitative method is positivist, that is the search for objective, neutral, free reality. Whereas the philosophy of qualitative method is interpretative, or trying to understand the meaning of the behavior or trying to understand the way in which human actions are, interactions are taking place. Then if you look into the group studies, this also I have said earlier, that the group in a quantitative study is small. Quantitative is a large, which is a large scale study which is being done. For instance, the whole country has to be studied, or the entire village has to be studied, whereas in qualitative it is a small, within a country it could be one particular state, or within the state it could be a particular district, or it could be even micro level, that it could be a family, or it could be one group in the society which is under studied. And the logic for the smaller size of the universe of the study is that it is then possible for the researcher to himself or herself interact with every respondent of the research. If we look into the quantitative methods, it explains phenomena by collecting and analyzing numerical data. Tells you if there is a difference, but not necessarily why. So they will only tell you that there is a difference between the family structure in India and in US, but it will not tell you why there is a difference. So the only numbers will say that 40% are joint family in India, and only 30% or 10%, just a vague idea, are joint family in America. But it will not tell the nature of jointness in Indian society. Data collected are always numerical and analyzed through statistical methods. Variables are controlled as possible because it's a large scale, so there is a question that there are certain control in terms of selecting certain samples, in terms of applying certain variables for the understanding, and therefore they can it is in kind of a controlled environment in which research is taking place. Randomization to reduce subjective, so we have random sampling. You have to study the entire society, to you randomly select the households so that the subjective bias does not creep in. So the choice of the sample is not dependent on the personal bias of the researcher. And if there is no numbers involved, then it is not a quantitative study. So then the nature of the study would change. Some types of researches lend themselves better to quantitative approach than other, and that is like if you're trying to understand it is entirely the nature of the research or the objective of the research which is very important. So if we are trying to understand certain nature of the society, certain facts, certain figures, then quantitative study is more suitable. Data source includes survey, which there are large number of respondents, observation, count of numbers or coding data into numbers, secondary data, that is government data and literature or any other existing research. Analysis technique include hypothesis testing, correlation and cluster analysis. So then we try to understand only two types of quantitative method. One is survey and the other is the experiment. A survey is a research method in which subjects respond to a series of statements or question in a questionnaire or an interview. Surveys are directed at population, the people who are the focus of research. So as I have already said that in every 10 years the Government of India comes out with a census. The census is a survey, the method or the technique of data collection for the census is a survey. That is house to house data is collected. Many a time the survey we need a sample. We need not necessarily study all the household, but we try to arrive at a certain sample, and there are certain methods of selecting the sample. Random sampling is one of the method in which sample is selected, and then that sample is considered as representative of the population. So the findings which comes on the basis of the study of the sample is then generalized to represent the entire population. Then survey may involve questionnaire. Questionnaire a series of questions which could be either open-ended or close-ended. Open, which there is a choice given that you can fill in according to the respondent, and close-ended is generally when it is yes, no, or certain options are given which the respondent is supposed to select. Surveys may also take the form of interview. So, questionnaires are generally written, and questionnaires are used when the sample is large. So, you cannot interview each and every respondent, so you send across questionnaire. Questionnaire could be sent through mail, it could be posted, or it could be personally handed down. So, it could also be an interview if the sample size is small and every respondent can be interviewed, then it is a verbal asking of question to the respondent, and again it could be in terms of open-ended or closed. That interview, you ask the respondent to select an option which is given as A, B, C, D, or you could ask the respondent to explain the question. And once the data observation can also be done, and most of the time these data is collected, then it is coded, and then it is analyzed through the use of softwares or statistical packages, and interpretation is arrived at. Then we have the second method of quantitative research, which is experiment. Experiment is a research for investigating cause and effect under highly controlled. So, experiment is coming in directly from the natural sciences, where you conduct an experiment in the laboratory to arrive at certain relation between the certain cause and certain factors which is responsible for the cause. Experiment result is explanatory, meaning that it asks not just what happens but why. Typically, researchers conduct an experiment to test hypotheses, unverified statements of relationship between variables. Most experiments are conducted in laboratory and employ experimental and control group. But as I have already said, that in the social science, the entire society is a lab. So, in the sense that the experiment would be conducted in the sense that, so if a sample of the universe is selected, they are asked to behave in certain manner or to interact in a certain manner, and that on the basis of the way in which it is being experimented at a one particular time, the interpretations are done. The Hawthorne effect is a change in subject's behavior caused by the awareness of being studied. So, there are certain controlled variable and controlled experiment where uncontrolled experiments. So, these are the examples of certain experiment which has been done. The Stanford Country Prison Study was an experiment conducted by Philip Zimbardo that supported the notion that character of a prison itself and not the personality of prisoners and guards cause prison violence. So, this is a study which was trying to understand why there is a prison violence, and the understanding was that it is not individual experience, but it is the structure of the prison in such that violence is prompt to happen. So, if the same individual were placed outside the prison, they could be more peaceful or they would not enter into a violent experiment. So, you create a kind of a false environment like a prison, put individuals as controlled variables and try to see the behavior that is being done and arrive at a generalizations. Then we come to the qualitative methods. Any research that doesn't involve numerical data, and that is they use words, pictures, photos, videos, audio recording, field notes, generally it's a more broader method of doing research, because it is not content to lab or it is not content to only collecting numerical data. So, in fact, the entire society becomes a field for the researcher, and one of the crucial component of research in the qualitative method is the field diary, which the researcher should maintain in order to note down the nitty-gritty or the everyday which might the researcher might forget when he is or she is writing the final report, and therefore the field diary becomes very crucial. So it starts with a broad question rather than a specific hypothesis. As I have already said, that it is not necessarily for a qualitative research to test a hypothesis. So you may have a hypothesis which needs to be tested, or you just begin with a broad understanding of the phenomena that needs to be more explored or needs a more in-depth analysis. So then the whole outcome is not to arrive at certain data, but to arrive at certain knowledge form, or constructs a new theory on the basis of the research which is being done. And therefore, the data which is yielded through qualitative research is more rich, and it is more explanatory of the social reality. It does not need a large sample size, and there is no generalization. So on the basis of the study of one society, generalization cannot be achieved, because again the philosophy is interpretative, and there is a significance of relativity or reflexivity, that the content of the research and the objective of the research will differ according to the social, economic and political conditions under which the research is being taken. Some issues which arise, however, while doing qualitative research are, many a time the respondent may give false information, because there is no way in which you can control the answers which given by the respondent. Sometimes the respondent give answers which he or she thinks the interviewer wants to listen. So then again there is no accountability of the answers which is taken in by the researcher. Ethical issues will be very problematic. There are a lot of ethical issues which I will come in later, which is very difficult in the sense of a qualitative research. And again, the whole question of objectivity, whether a researcher can do away with the personal bias and prejudice in the study of a particular society, is again questionable. Because for instance, if you are trying to understand communal violence, and you are trying to understand the Hindu-Muslim relation, and the personal biases or personal feeling of the researcher is very difficult, or political ideology is difficult to keep it away, and it does to a large extent influence the research which is being done. So the techniques of qualitative data analysis are interview, which could be structured, semi-structured or unstructured. Structured interviews are sense that it has a certain format, it has a certain kinds of question, fixed question and close-ended. And then you have some amount of structure, and there is one which is totally in a kind of a informal conversation between the researcher and the respondent. So you don't have any questions, or you don't have predefined questionnaire in your hand. You just enter into a kind of a conversation with the respondent, and through the conversation with the respondent, certain understanding of the phenomena or the processes arrived at. So then another is the focus group discussion, where a certain number of the respondent are entered into a conversation in a group. Everyone is free to give in the opinion, and it could be actually controlled by the researcher, or it could be just a kind of a discussions taking place between 5 to 10 members, and then again kind of an understanding arrived at. So this secondary data sources in the qualitative research would include diaries of individual, self-reported written accounts of past events, archive data and company reports. And many a time we also try to do a direct observation through audio or video. But again, the observation, which is a very important method in research, is again problematic, where the question of whether the identity of the researcher should be revealed or whether it should not be hidden is again a debatable idea in social sciences. Another technique is, and which is very important part of qualitative research, is ethnography. Ethnography is in a sense trying to put across the ideas of the people there as it is experienced by themselves. The researcher is not supposed to bring in his or her understanding of the life or interaction and just put it across as the respondents feel, believe, or would interact. Ethnography generally takes place through a long, continuous participant observation of the researcher with the respondent. So, we try to come to the techniques of research in qualitative, and the first is ethnography and case study. Ethnography is a naturalistic method based on studying people in their own environment in order to understand the meaning they attribute to their activity. Ethnography is often two-part activity: active participation in an observation of naturally occurring setting and then writing account, that is the field note. Second method is case study. It is more intensive, that is, it could be a intense, in-depth study of one particular case, and this could take place in the following combination: one individual case study, or it could be a group of persons such as family or gang. It could be a class of persons such as thief or professors. It could be an ecological unit. Each of these could become a case. Cultural units such as fashion or institution. So, each of these groupings becomes a case, and in-depth time spent study is done on the behavior, interaction, everyday experience of the individuals belonging to these groups. Then, as I have already said, interviews is a technique which is used in both qualitative and quantitative method, and it could be in the sense that it could be could be both. It could be in the sense structured, where you have certain questions which is given to the respondent, or it could be informal discussions with the researcher. Then we come to observation. Observation is a technique through which, as the term says, that you observe the phenomena and reality. There are two kinds of observation, that is participant observation and non-participant observation. In qualitative research method, it is the participant observation which is more frequent, and it is used that you either become a complete participant in the community life or the group to which you study. And most important, one of the most important study in sociology using participant observation was William Footwhite's study of the street corner society, and where he became one of the respondent and tried to understand the life of a poor neighborhood in Boston. Non-participant observation is that you do not participate in everyday life but you could observe the everyday experience as a non-participant. And then there are certain advantages and disadvantages of every research methods, that some, as I have already said in the course of the lecture, that social survey is a large sample, you can capture large amount of data, where however the problem is the generalization cannot necessarily be a true picture of social reality, because the content and context would change. Even in the participant observation gives the researcher an in-depth understanding of social reality, but there are certain ethical questions which becomes problematic while doing a participant observation. So, we have the mixed method research. In the mixed method research, both quantitative and qualitative research are used together. So, there is a methodological pluralism, that is, you employ both data, pictures, graphs, photos. In a sense, it becomes a more holistic understanding. So, you don't just rely on quantitative or on qualitative, but bring in both data. You try to bring in statistical understanding as well as bring in the qualitative aspect of research, and slowly the trend is towards more mixed method research. So, there was a shift from quantitative to qualitative, and in the recent time it is more in terms of a mixed method research. And when we use multiple methods or multiple techniques for data collection and data analysis, the term triangulation is used. Triangulation helps you to use multiple methods at the same time to arrive at a certain understanding of the social reality. So, when we try to do research, it's a circle that we identify the knowledge gap, search for existing information, do the data collection, analyze the data, and disseminate, implement. When the data is collected, analyzed, and there's certain kind of new knowledge that needs to be researched, and that takes you back to the first stage. So that is why it is said that it's a kind of a cyclical process. So then we come into the last part of the lecture, which is on the ethics, that as much as the research is important for the researcher, the respondent, who is an important component of the research, is important. So we should not force or coerce anybody to answering certain questions. It should be an informed consent, it should be a voluntary participation, and the respondent should not be at a risk of harm. That is, by any means, while answering a question, his or her life should not be at risk. Then the data collected should be confidential, and the attempt should be made not to disclose the names of the respondent as much as one can. So if these stages and the process of research data collecting are maintained, then the role of the research of generating new knowledge and trying to find out new truths will be accomplished. Thank you.
With this note, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much. Dear friends, if you want to see this lecture once again, then we would like to tell you all that we are going to upload this lecture on YouTube. Afterwards, you can see the lecture, and definitely you can give your feedback for this particular lecture at info.cec@nic.in. We would be meeting again soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much.